home alone yesterday? Like, was that the first time
No, we
you?
brought him with us.
Okay,
Yeah, but my dad has like a
it would have been a gutsy
big
move.
yard, so he can run around and wreak havoc. So he was happy. He was tired when we got back,
But
which is good. So, yep. And with that, we are live. I think hopefully everybody can hear us and it sounds fine. Welcome to episode 99 of Trek Live. It's crazy that we've gone 99 episodes. Getting down to the nitty gritty, closing in on that 100th episode. Bill, how you doing this morning?
doing really well. Yeah, 99 is insane. Really went by pretty quick. Feels like we just started doing that. So coming up on that 100 is, a pretty strange feeling in a good way. But yeah, really happy to be back. We were off last week. A lot of fantasy football shenanigans happening on our end.
Yep.
Uh, but happy to be back. Labor Day weekend here in the United States. It's a 3-day weekend for me. I don't know if it is for you, Dan, right
I
now.
gotta work.
But you gotta work. That's a shame. Yeah.
It's okay.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
We're here talking Star Trek. It makes everything good. So, what are we talking about?
We are talking about what makes Star Trek so rewatchable, along with our rewatch strategies, because it does differ from person to person, and I think that would make for a fun kind of conversation. So, I'm excited to jump into it. I know we've kind of been wanting to talk about this for kind of a while. I've heard it, come up in other conversations before. So I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, me too. It does come up a lot, and there is like no shortage ways to do it. I feel like you see it on Twitter, just like casually
Yeah.
pop up and down in conversations all the time. People talking about what they're rewatching today, what kind of rewatch they're doing. Are they doing the whole thing? Are they doing kind of this show and then a different show? Are they going chronologically? Are they doing just kind of random episodes, whatever they feel like? So there's all kinds of ways to consume Star Trek because there's so much of it, and there's so many people constantly doing it, which is the other thing. Like, what makes Star Trek so easy to rewatch? Like, why are people perpetually like cycling through rewatches of Star Trek so often? So we're going to talk about all that stuff. Give our thoughts on it. Hopefully, if people are in the chat, I see Adam there. Welcome, Adam. Good morning.
Yeah, welcome.
If you guys are in the chat, feel free to share with us why you find yourself rewatching Star Trek, assuming you do, and what kind of ways you tend to go about doing it. Are you a random person? Are you like curated, shortened versions of series? Just watch the episodes you love, or do you watch the whole shebang in a certain order? Definitely anxious to how people do it.
Yeah. Before we jump into the kind of main topic today, do you want to jump into kind of our rewatches and talk about how they're going right now? Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Where are you? Have you watched anything in the last week or so?
I just watched Arena, and we kind of talked about this like off camera, off mic. It's got some some dark themes. I think it gets kind of written off as this cheesy episode because of obviously the fight with the Gorn, but there's some tough stuff in that episode. So maybe down the road that might make for a good Trek Live topic. But yeah, it was good. I liked it.
Good. Yeah. I'm definitely eager to kind of like crack Arena open as like a bigger topic. I feel like it's like the quintessential sort of TOS episode. It has everything that people sort of associate TOS with. It's got the corniness. It's got like quintessentially 1960s science fiction TV stuff in it with the Gorn. Stuff that would clearly be done very differently today.
Yes.
But it's also got like the classic Star Trek themes, and it goes to some pretty dark places, and it's got some actually really, like, I don't want to get too much into it because I'd really like to save it for a bigger conversation. But the thing that always shocks me about Arena when I go back to it is like people associate the sort of silliness of Kirk fighting the Gorn and what that looks like and all. But like the beginning of that episode where they beam down to Cestus 3 and it's bombed and it's like all kinds of chaos is happening, that's actually got some decent production values. Like you don't see a lot happening. It's very clear that like it's a bombed out, devastated like starbase, and people are dead and it looks like a battle just happened. Yeah. So it's people think about the fight scene, but it's actually got some of Trek's best, I think, most well-aged stuff in it in the first half of it, in the beginning, in the opening. And the theme, like the character stuff for Kirk, what he's kind of dealing with, trying to figure out is if that's not Star Trek, I don't know what is. So we're gonna cover that more in depth down the road. We're gonna talk about Arena. I think it's an episode that's worthy of its own kind of topic. But I'm glad you got to it, and so stay tuned for that.
Yep. How's your rewatch going? Working through TNG still?
Working through TNG. I started season 2. I watched the first 4 episodes of season 2 yesterday, which is a pretty wide variety. I gave of the 4 episodes, I gave one of them an A, I gave one of them a B, I gave one of them a C, and I gave one of them a D-. So a complete across the board, everything from great to terrible, and a little bit in between. So it was a unique day. Season 2 starts off with all kinds of episodes. I think the first thing that I definitely took note of is the tone shift between seasons 1 and 2. I don't think gets enough play. Like I think people always associate the Next Generation with the first 2 seasons are kind of in their own little box, and then it hits season 3, and then it's TNG proper. Like that's TNG the way people remember TNG. But season 2 immediately establishes itself as like a more serious show than season 1. Season 1 is very it comes the closest of all the other Star Trek to tapping into like the tone of the original series. It's kind of light. It doesn't take itself too seriously. The characters are kind of goofy. It tries to be very, very much sort of a throwback to the original series. I think it's trying in that direction. Where season 2, I think, is the first time that the show starts to feel tonally like the Star Trek that we get throughout the 90s and into the early 2000s with the Rick Berman era. It's just a darker show. The characters are more serious. I think you definitely see it, especially with like Troy in the first episode with the child. Troy is a very specific kind of character in the first season. She's got the weird, Yemen Rand style, like
the bun,
bubble hair, the bun hairstyle. She's sort of very aloof and distant, kind of very analyzing emotion from orbit, kind of thing, like very elevated from the rest of the crew, sort of in a weird way. But she seems much more grounded in the first episode, the child, where she's obviously a big part of the episode. She's kind of driving force of the episode. I think you immediately see a change in her character. I think you see a change in really all the characters. I think they all just feel more real, and less sort of like the defined like caricature character. Not to be insulting to the first season, but I just noticed a really clear shift going from 1 to 2, maybe more than I usually do. I think a lot of the changes from 2 to 3 that get a lot of play. Obviously, the writing gets exponentially better. They kind of cleaned house in the writing staff between 2 and 3. They have a new showrunner, and there's a lot of aesthetic things. They have a new director of photography. Going from 2 to 3, they have a new costume designer, new uniforms. All that stuff changes too. So the show looks different. It from a like aesthetics like tangible feel from 2 to 3 in a way that maybe 1 to 2 doesn't quite copy. But from a tonal standpoint, I think maybe the shift tonally from 1 to 2 is even more noticeable than 2 to 3. So that's maybe the biggest thing that I've noticed so far. But I love Elementary Dear Data. I love the Sherlock Holmes stuff in that. I love the dilemma that episode presents with Moriarty wanting to be more than he is, sort of a sort of prelude to the Doctor. He's in 1 hour kind of going through what the EMH and Voyager kind of goes through over the 7 seasons, kind of struggling to be more than he is. But he just can't. And with Moriarty in the holodeck, in TNG in that single episode, there's no way for the crew to handle it for a variety of reasons. So it doesn't have the possibilities that Doctor offers. But I think it's interesting that they're kind of two characters that are kind of cut from the same cloth with what they want and where they are in life.
Yeah.
So to speak. So totally enjoyed it. Even the episode that I didn't. I think the Outrageous Okana is terrible. I think it's one of the worst. It's really bad. Yeah, it's the Okana characters is a joke. Yeah. There's some unintentional laughs for sure. Yeah. It's like nails on chalkboard to me for most of it. It's yeah, it is what it is. Not a good episode as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. But yeah.
Yep.
If you like the Outrageous Okana, John Jones, who just entered the room, or Adam, let me know. I'll be anxious to hear what you think of that one.
I think we should just start off on the main topic.
Yeah, I think we should too.
Yeah. So I think we should start with kind of our rewatch strategies, because I think you and I differ in that. So welcome, Rob.
We do.
Start with, I know it's probably ever changing, but right now, what is kind of your rewatch strategy?
My rewatch strategy has pretty much been the same for a few years now, at least. I tend to go chronologically, and I tend to go. And I've talked about this on the show too before. Like, this is not new for anybody who's watched us many. But yeah, I'll start with Enterprise, and I'll work my way. You know, now it's Discovery between Enterprise and TOS, and then I do TOS, and then I'm into the 24th century shows, and I do TNG, DS9, Voyager. But I do them overlapping as they air. So I typically won't watch Deep Space Nine or Voyager kind of in a vacuum, just those shows. I watch them as they were airing, like up against each other. I'll watch an episode of DS9 and then an episode of Voyager. And then I have the movies sort of mixed in where they naturally fit in. I'll watch the TOS movies after TOS before TNG. And then the TNG movies, I kind of fit in where they would have fit as they came out. So like Generations, I watch after the 7th season of TNG, a little bit into the third season of Deep Space Nine. I watch Insurrection in the middle of season 5 of Voyager and season 7 of Deep Space Nine. I watch Nemesis at the end, and then I watch the Kelvin Timeline stuff. And this time next year, I'll be watching Picard after the Kelvin Timeline stuff, I think. So I mostly stick to that pattern as of now and for the past few years. I have a hard time deviating from that for some reason. I'm not somebody who has a very easy time picking a random episode here and there. I'll do it occasionally for a special circumstance. Like I'll do it when we have Trek After Dark. Yeah. For example, if we're doing something fun and it's like with somebody, I'll pop in and I'll just watch an episode here or there. But I have a hard time like on my own making a habit of just kind of going up to a shelf and saying, okay, I'm just gonna watch yesterday's Enterprise.
Yeah.
Pluck one out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a hard time with that. I wish I didn't, because I think it would be kind of cool to be able to function that way. But I'm pretty much a stickler for that chronological. Never skip an episode. Watch it all. Watch Code of Honor every time. Never skip Spock's brain. Like hit everything.
Even the animated series.
No, the animated series is good. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
No, I tend not to do that. I have I want to say it was the last time I did it.
Mm-hmm.
I did do the animated series in between TOS and the motion picture.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that, like, unlike the rest of it, every like maybe once a decade I'll do it. It might be like every 3 or 4 full rewatches. I might take a shot at it. John Jones says Bill needs structure and a sense of order. Yes, that is definitely me when it comes to my rewatch strategy. I also tend to, like, you know this, Dan, I've told you this many times. I tend to, for whatever reason, this is sort of like a weird unwritten rule that I stumbled into, but now I really stick to. I tend to only watch it on the weekends. I don't watch Star for whatever reason, like after work. I don't know why. There's not like a real. I can't find a reason for it, but I tend to. I guess maybe that's my way of like giving myself space and distance from it, like give
Right.
myself a little bit of a break to keep it somewhat fresh. I don't make a habit of like every single day. It's what I do. I'll watch chunks of it in weekends, and then I step away for the work week. I go to the movies a lot, as people who come here often know, and obviously you know, Dan. So a lot of
Yeah.
times during the week, I'm going to a movie here. I'm watching a movie at home there, but I don't do a lot of Star Trek watching through the. So what about you? How would you define your
Uh,
rewatch strategy?
so my rewatch strategy is pretty still in its kind of infancy stage because this is my only second time rewatching everything. So I guess I'll just run down through my first watch ever. So I started with Voyager, obviously my favorite. I don't have the structure down like Bill does.
Sure.
And then I went to TNG, just because I heard that everybody loved it, so I went there. And then I went Enterprise, and then I went TOS, and then I went the animated series. Struggled through that, and then I finished with Deep Space Nine because I didn't know much about it, and to be honest, I didn't really want to watch it because it wasn't what I had seen before. So
Mm-hmm.
then this is my second time going through again, starting with Voyager because I finished, I wanted to come back. So Voyager,
Sure.
then I went Enterprise after that, per maybe Bill's kind of influence. But then I went TNG,
Guidance.
and then I'm on TOS, and then I probably won't do the animated series again, and then I'll finish with Deep Space Nine. Now, you guys maybe is asking yourself, well, there's Discovery's not on that. That goes to my kind of second part of my strategy. I want to keep Star Trek as fresh as possible for as long as possible. Now, it's tough because that's kind of a catch-22 because I want to be knowledgeable and I want to have seen everything and be able to talk about it, but I love it so much. I want to continue this fresh perspective. So I have this kind of Golden Gate Bridge theory. If you guys don't know, outside of the U.S., it's a very big bridge in California. Once they paint it, and by the time they get done on the other side, it's time to repaint it again because it's so big and long. It's so I try to keep it, like I said, as fresh as possible for as long as possible, but still trying to retain some knowledge of it. So that's why Discovery is not on there because it's so fresh. There's some episodes of Discovery that I haven't seen since first run. So yeah, it's the same thing with Kelvin Timeline. Yeah, I've seen them a couple times, but I'm still again gonna try to keep that as fresh as possible for as long as possible. So that is my strategy, as far as I rewatch Trek. So
I love that you're able to do that because what it does maintains your ability to like go into an episode, like say I'm not going to spoil it, I'm not going to go into it, but people who know the episode well will know what I'm talking about. There's a Deep Space Nine episode from pretty early on called Whispers, which is very twisty turny. That half the fun of it is kind of discovering the twist and figuring it out and figuring out like what the heck is going on, and that's been long gone for me. I haven't been able to experience that episode like that since 1990 whatever, 96 maybe, when I was a young kid and didn't know it that well and maybe only saw it once or twice. But because I've watched it so many times and I'm constantly watching it, and there's never that much space between watches of it. They're really watching it really isn't about being surprised anymore. It's about like kind of tapping into the pleasure of why I like the universe and why I like the character, seeing the production value and just appreciating the storytelling. You get to go into episodes like that and sort of crack it open for the first time again, get taken along for a ride, and not necessarily know what's around it, and not when you hit play on the episode know this is
I don't
exactly
really
how this is
remember
going to play
that
out.
episode that well, so I'm excited to kind of
Yeah.
to do that. So yeah.
You have that ability, and that's something I'm definitely jealous of. And I think there's a difference too in that one of the things, like you kind of said it, you're just now kind of getting through Star Trek for the second time. You're still very fresh with it. You haven't.
Yes.
Like that's the other big difference between you and me. I've been watching it I've been watching it for 30 years.
Yeah.
It's something that's like ingrained into my DNA at this point, and the knowledge of it is kind of like just there, whether I want it to be or not, because I've watched it so many times for so, and maybe that influences why I watch it a certain way. I don't know. Like maybe that's why I tend to go back to it. It's like the ultimate comfort food. It's like a blanket to kind of constantly go back to and have on. So yeah, I definitely. But to like maybe that's not true because you sort of ever since I've known you, you've been constantly watching in some capacity. Like you're not you tend to go. You might go a little slower than I do. Like you don't go through like a week where you'll watch, like even this past rewatch for me, I haven't been quite doing it to this extent, but last rewatch before this and a couple before that, like I 8, 9, 10 episodes in a weekend was not totally usual. Like that was common for me.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily go with that, but you know, if somebody asked you, "Hey, are you rewatching Star Trek?" Since I've known you for the 3-4 years we've been talking, you would say yes. Like you're in the middle of watching this show or that show.
Yeah.
You go at a more deliberate pace. You take it slow, which gives you more time. Right. Like it's a longer period of time by the time you end up back at Voyager, and it keeps everything fresh. So what you're doing is achieving what you're looking for. It's keeping it a little more fresh in your mind.
And I do think that, you know, one day I maybe will get there where I've, you know, again, it's not fresh like that, but my strategy, again, is keeping it fresh as possible for as long as possible. So, yeah, I think that's, I will eventually get to a point in my life where I'll be like, yeah, I've seen this like 18 times and it won't be as fresh as possible. But, now that being said, I guess we can kind of jump into kind of the Trek Live crew members' strategies here.
Sure, yeah.
Just before we kind of keep this thing moving here. Let's see. Adam's strategy is basically the same as Bill's. Go chronologically.
He mixes and matches.
Yeah, that's one thing that I didn't touch on my rewatch. I sprinkle in the TNG and TOS movies whenever I kind of feel like it. There's no rhyme or reason for those. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's see. It looks like Rob is not as structured as his rewatch. He chooses a series that he hasn't watched in a while and watches it in order. And however, he does jump into random episodes from different series from time to time. Gotcha.
That's the way I kind of wish I could do it.
Yeah.
Do kind of both. You kind of get the best of both worlds. You're watching a series in sequence, like you're kind of getting to experience the show as it was meant to be seen, beginning to end. But you're pretty good. You know, feeling like Voyager tonight, you'll go pop a Voyager episode, even if you're doing TNG right now. Yeah. I wish I had that capacity. I need Trek After Dark as an excuse to watch a random show, pretty much.
So Bill, what makes Star Trek's so easily rewatchable? What makes it so rewatchable? I know that's a big can of worms, but I guess we could start down that road.
It is. You could certainly go in a lot of different directions. There's a lot of but for one, I think it's helped by the fact there's so much of it. I think the Golden Gate Bridge thing you did is exactly sort of it. No matter, even if you go fairly quickly, by the time you get to the end of it, you know, it's been a while since you were watching whatever you started with. So it's there's so much volume to it, and it's growing even that it's easy to kind of get enveloped in it, and by the time you work your way through it, it sort of feels fresh again. But you know, obviously, you know, the sort of cliche answer to that question that I think is also true is it's like the positivity. It's surrounding yourself and living in a world with characters that are like good people and not exhausting to be around. They're not people that are, you know, like we talk about the show a lot off air. Like Breaking Bad, for example, is one of the best shows of all time. Like pretty unequivocally, it's definitely like top tier television. But it's not something that I have an easy time just saying, "Oh, I'm going to put my feet up."
Pop on an episode.
Yeah, it's not a pleasant show. It's not these people are all they're all scumbags pretty
Yeah.
much. I mean, they're complicated people that you can get behind for reasons when you're into the show. But Star Trek is unique in the sense that the characters that you're sort of following are, I would say, they're good people doing good deeds for good reasons. Like that's when you boil it all down, that's an easy thing to be around. If that's the kind of person you want to be, if that's sort of how you want to lead your life, you want to be one of those kinds of people. Star Trek's sort of like fueling that fire. It's keeping that alive. It's kind of giving you guidance through life, giving me guidance through life to keep me motivated to try to do the right thing for the right reason.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the positivity of the characters in the universe itself, the optimism of it, you know, life obviously is always you know, a series of ups and downs. You know, you have good days at work, bad days at work. Things come up in life that are challenging. I think the fact that Star Trek's been there for me for 30 years, my whole life, and it is that positivity sort of reinforcement. It makes it very easy to have it be sort of the constant that is the antidote for a lot of things.
Right.
What about you? Like, why do you think it's? I mean, as somebody who's just doing it a second time, like, what do you think keeps you interested in coming back to it?
Again, I echo the kind of, there is so much kind of theory that it does feel fresh, but I think that the amount also is a thing. Also, there's a lot to get through. But for me, the Star Trek kind of universe and all the shows is kind of ever changing. And as long as, like, I mean, I feel like I'm going to be ever changing. So,
Yeah.
the episode may change a couple years down the road when my life and my situation is changing and I get different things out of it. And it's ever changing, and that they keep adding to it, and that's adding, you know, context to kind of past episodes.
Yeah.
So to me, it's almost never the same Trek the next rewatch cycle. It's never, I get more out of it. I get, you know, I kind of explore different sides of it. That's helped me kind of discover different sides of, you know, what I'm going through here and in my life. So I think that's kind of a big aspect of it too, is that there's a lot to explore, not just in Trek, but also it helps you again in life. So I think that's the big thing for me. Also, John Jones put it pretty well. The comfort food factor is real for sure. I love it. So yeah.
The comfort food factor is definitely real.
Yeah.
And I talked about this. I did a guest spot on Penske File, who is often in our chat. That'll be coming out in the next couple of days. I did a podcast with them, kind of talking about sort of this topic. We talked really specifically about like ranking Star Trek and why we do it. Like, what's the reason behind doing polls and you know, ranking episodes. And the sort of thesis I'll kind of share with you guys, since we're here and it's our show, that you'll hear in that podcast as well, is kind of trying to combat that comfort food thing a little bit. The thing that I sort of struggle with Star Trek sometimes is because it is so comfortable, and because I've seen it so many times, it's really easy to kind of put it on in the background and just have it be static noise in the background.
Right.
That is just like, I'm kind of half watching it. It's something I, you know, look at my phone and scroll Twitter and think about all kinds of other things without having to put my full attention into the show.
Right.
And there's definitely something to be said for that. It's comfortable. It's something I can kind of turn my brain off and have on as entertainment when I'm trying to multitask and do other things. But I want to fight back against that a little bit. I want Star Trek to be something that I watch with my brain on. I want to be able to like zone into it and get something out of it beyond just passively absorb. So the reason for me, put a lot of effort into things like ranking episodes and doing polls and statistically putting together, says this is what the Twitter community thinks of this episode, and the Trekkie Awards, things like that, is all designed to keep these rewatches fresh to force me to watch it with some sort of a critical eye, and to not just put the outrageous Akona on and be like, oh, it's just the outrageous Akona. I'm just gonna spend this episode, reading Twitter or reading a football magazine or something, and just kind of having it on in the background I watched it, even though I really by forcing myself to like write a little mini review, even if it's only 240 characters, and give it a grade and be able to do a Trekkie award for that season. It kind of forces me to sit down and give that episode the 45 minutes that it has, and treat it like its own thing and give it the time. So that's sort of the way I try to combat the downside of rewatching the way I rewatch so often and so many times. I try to find new ways to keep it fresh. And Trek Live is obviously probably the big thing that has kind of given me that life.
Yep.
Like having to sit down and talk to you, Dan, and talk to everybody here and have things to talk about keeps me watching Star Trek in a fresh light. I feel like I'm constantly looking for, what do we talk about? What's something that would make for a good conversation, with whether it's with Dan on here with everybody else, or even if we didn't do Trek Live, what could I talk to Dan about, or what could I talk to Adam about or Rob about? Like having something like this and social media, Star Trek Twitter and YouTube and Trek Live, like all these things like play into keeping Star Trek fresh for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. Part of it too is I love to watch and then kind of report back and then come and talk about it with, all the Trek Live crew members and everyone on Twitter. So that's part of it too. I love to, come watch it, come back, kind of see what other people think, talk about it. Oh, I didn't see that. This is what I saw. So, yeah, and John Jones again hitting the nail on the head. There's no wrong answers. I love the fact that there's no other kind of series or show. I mean, maybe Stargate or some of those other sci-fi shows, but there's no like polarizing kind of episodes where like, hey, there's one person likes this, one person likes this, so totally different. So yeah,
you could pick out any random episode of any of the Star Trek shows and pluck it out and have like if you wanted to, you could have a really rich conversation about it. And if you put enough people in the room, you're going to get a wide variety of it.
Yeah.
My favorite thing about doing the Twitter thing with the episodes is tweeting my thoughts on an episode that I either really love or really don't like, especially the polarizing ones, the ones that I have a strong, like not just a C or a B or something, like this one's an A, this one's a D- or an F, and then get you're crazy, like having the complete opposite opinion shared by somebody, which inevitably sparks a little bit of a conversation that I love following, and hearing what different people think. So you're absolutely right, because of sort of the nature of Star Trek and the volume of it and the types of stories it's telling, and part of that I think is probably maybe like the episodic nature of it, because each episode is sort of so unique, especially in the 90s shows and the 60s shows. Each episode is sort of its own thing, right. So opinions may vary wildly on a lot of these episodes. So it does it bring about all kinds of really interesting conversations about each individual episode. Every episode, I don't know if every episode is somebody out there's favorite, but every episode out there is loved by some. There's not any episode that's like universally 100% yes or 100% no.
Rob's says it's a lens we can see our world through and discuss and analyze ourselves, our societies, politics, ethics, etc.
Absolutely.
Again, well said, Rob. It's kind of this common thing we can kind of discuss very polarizing topics, right? There's
through the lens of
yeah.
And it's sort of kind of doubling off of that. You can look at the big picture topics like Rob's saying, societies, politics, ethics, but I think maybe the more interesting one is even like talking about yourself, like Dan, you were saying, part of the fun with Star Trek is it does change as your life changes. You see
Yeah,
episodes different
definitely.
now than you did when you were in high school watching it, or
Right.
like in my case when I was 8 years old watching Arena. I loved it for completely different reasons than
Yeah.
I loved it now for. Like I loved Kirk when I was 8, and I didn't see anything wrong with it. It was freaking cool,
Yeah.
and I still do in a lot of ways. But the things I latch onto in that episode are wildly different, and things I find myself thinking about for the next day or two after I watch it are wildly different than you know what I did years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it does change with our life experiences and where we are. Can really shift our perspective on the episodes of the shows and what they're trying to say,
Yeah.
which I think is a big part of it too. And that's another thing. Like John Jones just said, he likes Rascals now still because he saw it as a kid and loved it as a kid, and that's part of it too for me. For me, a big part of it is there's a big nostalgia factor.
Oh
Like
yeah.
TNG season 1 is very problematic in a lot of ways. I just talked about that at the beginning of the show, like the radical shift in tone from 1 to 2. But when I watched season 1, there's so much nostalgia associated with it because I loved that season as a kid. I watched it a lot as a so each episode has memories associated with it. I always say that's part of why I think I love Enterprise as much as I do. It was my 4 years in high school, so there's all these things that were like happening in life during those 4 years. I when I watch those episodes, I'm also thinking, maybe people that I haven't thought about in years, and
Right.
things I was doing in life back those days. So it has that to its advantage too, which makes it easy to double back to and rewatch. There's other memories that you end up tapping into when you go back.
Is there any other show, a non-Trek show, that you rewatch as often as you do Star Trek?
Not as often. There are shows that I really love that I watch,
Yeah.
but I can go years between going back to them. Where Star Trek is sort of for the last probably 5, 6, 7 years is in a constant state of
Right.
being chronically rewatched in some capacity for me. Where I can't say that about any other show. I love The Sopranos. I love Mad Men. I love The West Wing. I love The Office, and I do double back to shows like that very often, more often than. More often than that. There are a lot of shows I've watched that I have never really gone, but not to the same level. I could watch Mad Men now this year, but I might not go back to it. It could be years for sure.
Yeah.
What about you? Are there other shows that you find yourself like?
No, again, I'm kind of in the same boat. I may have movies that I like to hit yearly just because I love them so much, but
Me too.
I don't have. I have some that I do like a 2-year, 3-year cycle, but not as often as Trek for sure. But when I think about it, man, it may take me 1 to 2 years to finish a rewatch cycle. So again, by then it's time to start again. So this,
Sure.
yeah.
And I'll be honest, like kind of piggybacking on that, the last 2 times I rewatched Star Trek, like through Twitter and publicly sort of shared my thoughts about each step along the way, I finished it and I said to myself, and I even said on Twitter, that's it, I'm done, I'm taking a step away, taking a break, and I'm going to give it a year or so, weeks, months at most. It inevitably,
yes.
it'll be like 2 months later and I'll be like, what am I doing with my life? I'm not watching the thing I love the most.
Yeah.
I'm wasting life away. So it ends up coming back, even when I think I'm going to take a break. And this, to be fair, this particular time, what I'm doing right now, I made a conscious effort, and I am sticking to it. I've been pretty good about it to take longer with it and don't rush through it.
Right.
Focus on other things. I got things going on in life that I do, and
Yeah.
I have other things I'm watching. So I don't exclusively watch Star Trek as much as I have maybe in other points along the way. So I'm doing a little better with spacing it out and giving it a little bit more time. But it's It's been good. I find it. I'm already kind of seeing the benefits of taking it slower and giving myself more space between seasons and episodes. And by the time I'm back to Enterprise again, it'll be a window than it has been in a while, and I'm sure that'll benefit the next rewatch. There's been a little bit more space than I'm used to. So.
Yeah.
I'm learning from you, Dan.
Yeah.
So
you do recommend breaks from not just series, but like between seasons? Because I find myself kind of needing that break.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much between seasons, but maybe between series. Kind of let that breathe and let me kind of process, because it is a big chunk of content, so to speak. So I think it's definitely recommended if there's some future or new rewatchers. I don't know.
I would recommend it. I mean, for me personally, I like to look at the seasons kind of as their own things as much as I can. I always like to say, like, I look at Star Trek as kind of one big long show as opposed to 5 or 6 shows making it up.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the way I do like the Trekkie Awards and things like that, I kind of do like to look at a season isolated in a little box and taking a week between jumping to the next season kind of makes that a little easier. I try to let that season kind of stand on its own and not let things just run into each other and just become one big long thing. Mm-hmm. For me, and it does, it creates a little bit extra. It makes it last a little bit longer before you get to the next thing. For me, it works really well, and I would recommend it. If you're somebody like me, if what I'm saying sounds familiar at all with like having to maybe push back against going too quickly and consuming it like background noise and not really get, the attention because you've seen it so many times. If those things are familiar, some things that you find yourself doing, that's been a good strategy for me.
Yeah.
Give it a little space.
John Jones is stating that he hadn't gone 8 weeks without seeing Star Trek since 92. Adam says that's longer than he's been alive. I would have to agree with that, John. I was born in 94. But it's kind of crazy to think about timelines. So looking back at my timeline, the last time I've seen Deep Space Nine was 2014-15.
Wow.
So that's 5 years.
Long time.
So
you're gonna and kind of going off of what you were talking about earlier, which I think, and like maybe the most key thing, maybe whole conversation is you're at a very different point in your life.
Very different
now when you hit Deep Space Nine than when you were watching that 5 years ago. So you're going to get very different things out of that show now than you would have before, especially that show. That show is dealing with a lot of themes that I think are gonna speak to you, just by being older and being a married guy. There's married characters in that show, people who deal with those kinds of relationships. That's much more on the forefront of that show than some of the others, and just the type of storytelling it's doing. I think as people age, it might work maybe a little better. I don't know. I certainly find that I appreciate Deep Space Nine more and more every time I go back, and the more I get older.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I couldn't tell you to respond to John. I don't know if I've ever gone 8 weeks without seeing Star Trek. I really don't know.
I think it would be fun to just kind of see once I finish Deep Space Nine to see how long I can go without watching it. So
it's hard. It's a challenge for me. I find myself missing it pretty quickly.
Anything else?
I don't think so. I appreciate everybody who's here kind of sharing their strategies. We had a pretty good mix in here. We have like Adam sort of follows my lead and does like the full on chronological. Like we talked about earlier, he shared that. Rob is a little bit more jumping around. Doesn't necessarily go in chronological order, but does tend to do shows in bulk. But mixes randoms in there. And I want to say John might fit somewhere in the middle there. I don't know if he shared completely. He was very similar to you. He bounced I think.
Yeah, bounces around
He
shows.
said he rewatches like Dan.
Yeah.
So we have a decent mix there, and I know
Yep.
I posted a poll on Twitter asking people like how they rewatch, and it was a pretty mixed response. There were responses of random episodes, no real structure to it. People watch the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people saying they do kind of curated, like they'll pick a show and they'll just kind of skip around, or they'll skip the episodes that they don't feel like they need. A lot of people do that. So there's all kinds of ways to do it, and as our friend Jim Morehouse says over at Trek Ranks, there's no wrong answers. It's
Yep.
whatever works for you. It's whatever makes you tick and what you get the most enjoyment out of. So that's the real final answer. The right way to watch Star Trek is your way to watch.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to end it. Any Star Trek content that you want to highlight before we pop off?
Yeah, there's a really neat YouTube that kind of somewhat reminds me of Us in that it's got a very similar look. It's two people on screen next to each other. It's conversation. It's called Trek Favorites. It's a YouTube channel. It's a guy who is I want to say like an Apple technology podcaster. He covers all the news in Apple, but he interviews a random different person each week and basically asks them what's your favorite episode or what episode means something to you the most. And it's just a conversation about what and why and how. I'm really enjoying it. It's really cool. They're about 30-40 minutes, and there's a wide array of episodes. I mean, the two guys from Mission Log were the first two guests. There have been a lot of people I'm not familiar with, a lot of people who podcast in the tech world, who cover technology stuff, have been guests. So unfamiliar faces and voices talking about Star Trek, who you don't usually hear, which has been kind of cool too. It's not sort of the same pool of people that we're kind of always used to hearing. So Trek Favorites is one that I would definitely recommend to everybody. Pop over and check out.
Yeah.
What about you?
I'd like to highlight an episode of Primitive Culture, Trek FM. I know we talk about Trek FM a lot. They just have some good content.
Sure.
The episode is Silent Running. It's kind of covers the movie The Hunt for Red October, and then also some of like the TNG stuff with kind of the Romulans and that Cold War era type, and how it kind of coincides and intertwines. So The Hunt for Red October is probably top 10 movie all time for me. So I saw that and I immediately popped it on. So definitely give it a listen. So yeah.
Motivate me to check out the Hunt for Red October again.
Yes.
So that's definitely a cool one. And I'll definitely I'll also just say the Penske File. Check that out.
Yes.
Another day or so. I'll be on that talking about ranking Star Trek and reviewing Star Trek and polls and all that geeky methodology that I spend a lot of time in.
Yeah.
So.
Rob is quoting a 10 Backward podcast, 2-parter episode about Loxana Troy, and he makes a good point. Bill and I aren't the only ones who can kind of quote great content. We want you guys also. That's always encouraged. Absolutely. As well.
And we'll read it and share it because there's so much of it out there. I'll be honest, there are great shows that I don't listen to religiously just because there's not enough time in the day. So if like Rob, when you share that, I'm going to go check that out, or I'm at least going to edge 10 Backward further up in my queue. That puts it in my mind that, man, I got to listen to that show. I don't listen to it every week because there's just so much Star Trek content that I try to spread it out and get little tastes of everything as much as I can. So really appreciate you sharing that. And if anybody else wants to highlight a podcast or a YouTube channel that you really enjoy, especially if it's something that's maybe a little lesser. We spend a lot of time, we highlight Trek Ranks, which a lot of people in our community follow because we love it. But there are a lot of shows out there like ours that, might not have the immense notoriety in the community, and we'd love to highlight those shows as much as we can. Look for the 10 backward fight episode. It's hilarious. Yes, cool. I'll definitely do that.
Yeah, this segment was kind of devised to help us navigate this vast, wide,
Yeah.
kind of gamut of Star Trek content. So it's not just Bill and I; it's everyone, helping each other navigate some really great content. So definitely go check that out. Speaking of great content, we've got some great stuff planned for episode 100. So definitely stay tuned to Twitter and kind of Discord and all the facets here on Trek Live. So yeah, you guys know the drill. The discussion does not have to stop here. Again, come over to Facebook, Twitter, Discord channel. Can't emphasize that enough. Had a great discussion today about rewatches. Look forward to seeing you guys and keep the discussion going on in the future. So,
Yep, looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.